The garden hose is the most expensive tool in the shed, not because of what it costs to buy, but because of what it costs to use. Every single day, every single summer, for the rest of the time the garden exists. Water bills in the American Southwest have increased by an average of 30% over the last decade. Drought restrictions across the Southeast, the Mountain West, and increasingly the Upper Midwest are limiting outdoor water use to specific days and specific hours. And in the middle of all of this, the American garden industry is still selling plants that require daily irrigation to survive, positioning that dependency as normal, as expected, as simply the price of having a garden. It is not the price of having a garden. It is the price of having the wrong plants. Because certain plants do not need the hose, not because they tolerate drought the way a weed tolerates neglect, but because they have spent millions of years of evolutionary time building their own water storage and delivery systems underground, systems so sophisticated that the engineering industry is actively studying them as models for passive water management infrastructure. 9 plants, each one a self-funded, self-maintained underground reservoir that charges itself during rainfall and draws on that reserve through drought, without any input from the gardener. The hose stays in the shed before plant number 1. Plant number 5 on this list stores water in a root system so large and so hydraulically efficient that it has been measured maintaining active growth through 40 consecutive days without rainfall in USDA zone. 7. It costs under $8 at any garden center. It is in the perennial section. Nobody behind that counter will tell you what it is capable of, because a plant that survives 40 days without water is a plant that does not generate repeat sales. That plant is coming. Stay for it. Plant 1, Russian sage, Perovskia atriplycifolia, and the silver root architecture. Russian sage is one of the most misunderstood plants in American horticulture, and the misunderstanding is costing gardeners money and water in equal measure. It is sold as an ornamental, a tall, silver-stemmed, lavender-blue flowering perennial for the back of the border, and planted wherever a visual gap needs filling, often in average garden soil with average garden irrigation. This is not wrong exactly, but it completely misses the plant's most significant functional attribute, a root architecture so deep and so laterally extensive that it makes Russian sage one of the most drought-capable perennials available in American retail. Regardless of what zone it is planted in within its cold hardiness range, Perovskia atriplycifolia evolved on the dry steppes and rocky slopes of Central Asia and Afghanistan, where annual rainfall averages between 8 and 16 inches and summer temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit. In those conditions, surface soil moisture is effectively zero for months at a time. Russian sage survived this by developing a root system that drives vertically to depths of 3 to 5 feet in average garden soil, within 2 to 3 seasons of establishment, reaching the deep soil moisture that remains stable, even when the surface has been dry for weeks. The lateral spread of that root system at depth is equally significant, covering a horizontal radius of 2 to 3 feet in mature specimens. This is not a plant borrowing water from the top of the soil. It is a plant mining water from a zone that your hose has never reached and never will, the chemistry contributing to Russian sage's drought performance is concentrated in its leaf and stem surface compounds, primarily rosmarinic acid and various terpene volatiles that create the aromatic silver-gray foliage the plant is known for. These compounds are not coincidental aesthetics. They are functional adaptations. The silver color reflects solar radiation, reducing leaf temperature, and therefore the rate of transpiration, the process by which plants lose water through their leaf surfaces. The aromatic oils create a boundary layer of volatile compounds around the leaf surface that reduces the vapor pressure gradient driving water loss. In practical terms, a mature Russian sage, plant in full summer sun, is losing water through its leaves at a dramatically lower rate than a green-leaved plant of comparable size, while simultaneously drawing from a root reservoir that extends far below the dry surface zone. In USDA zones 5 through 9, Plant Russian sage in full sun in any well-drained soil, space at 24 to 30 inches, and do not water after the first establishment season. The plant will handle everything from that point forward without intervention. Plant 2, Echinacea, Echinacea purpurea, and the taproot storage. System coneflower is the plant that every American gardener has grown or attempted to grow, and the majority of them have been doing it wrong in a specific way that costs them both the plant and the water they spent trying to keep it alive. The misapplication is not a care failure. It is a placement failure. Specifically, the failure to understand that Echinacea's drought capability is almost entirely a function of its root architecture, and that root architecture requires undisturbed soil to develop to its functional depth. In disturbed, heavily amended, or frequently cultivated soil, Echinacea roots stay shallow, and the plant becomes water-dependent. In stable, undisturbed soil, the condition it evolved in, Echinacea develops a taproot that penetrates 18 to 24 inches in its first 2 seasons and reaches 36 inches or more in mature specimens, tapping a stable moisture reservoir that surface drought cannot access. The taproot system in Echinacea purpurea functions as a hydraulic lift mechanism, a documented biological process in which deep-rooted plants absorb water from moist deep soil layers at night when evaporative demand is low, and release a portion of that water into the dry upper soil layers through their shallow lateral roots. This process, called hydraulic redistribution or hydraulic lift, has been measured in Echinacea root systems in peer-reviewed soil science research. The plant is not merely accessing deep water for its own use, it is functioning as a passive water pump that moves moisture from the water table to the root zone, benefiting not only itself, but potentially the plants growing in proximity to its root system. In a diverse perennial planting, a mature Echinacea plant is functioning as a shared water resource for the surrounding community. The alkylamide compounds concentrated in Echinacea's root tissue, same compounds that give the medicinal preparations of this plant, their bioactive properties serve an additional function in the root system as osmotic regulators, helping maintain cellular water potential in root tissue during drought stress events. This is not a passive tolerance mechanism. It is an active biochemical response to water deficit that maintains root function under conditions that would cause cellular dehydration and root death in plants without this biochemical capability. Echinacea purpurea is hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9, planted in full sun to part shade in any soil that is not waterlogged. The one condition its root system cannot adapt to is anaerobic soil created by standing water, because the same deep root system that makes it drought capable requires oxygen at depth to function. Do not divide Echinacea unnecessarily. Every division disrupts the taproot architecture and resets the drought capability clock back to year 1. Plant 3, Baptisia, Baptisia australis, and the nitrogen-fixing water. Bank Baptisia, false indigo, is the plant that serious American perennial gardeners treat as a cornerstone investment and casual gardeners overlook entirely, because it spends its first 2 seasons looking like very little is happening above ground. What is happening below ground during those 2 seasons is the most significant root development of any plant on this list, and understanding it changes the entire calculus of whether the patience required is worth it. It is worth it. By a significant margin, Baptisia australis develops a root system in its first 2 seasons that has been measured at 5 to 8 feet of vertical depth in undisturbed prairie soil. The deep, stable moisture zone that summer drought in zones 3 through 9 does not penetrate. This root development is the reason that a 3-year-old Baptisia plant in the American Midwest can sit through a month of 90-degree temperatures and 0 rainfall and emerge at the end of that period with no visible stress. It is not the same drought tolerance as a cactus, which survives drought through desiccation and dormancy. It is genuine active drought capability through access to deep, stable moisture. The plant is growing normally. It is flowering normally. It is photosynthesizing normally. It has simply built its water supply infrastructure below the drought zone entirely. Baptisia also hosts nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules, the same rhizobium relationship that legumes use to convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available ammonium compounds. This is not directly related to drought capability, but it is economically significant in a companion planting context. A mature Baptisia plant in a perennial border is simultaneously accessing deep moisture, fixing atmospheric nitrogen into the surrounding soil, and producing deep root channels that improve soil structure and water infiltration for the plants growing near it. It is functioning as a water infrastructure investment, a fertilizer system, and a soil improvement program simultaneously at zero cost after establishment. Hardy in USDA zones 3 through 9, full sun to partial shade. Resents transplanting, the deep root system makes moving an established plant effectively impossible without destroying it. Choose the location carefully at planting and treat it as permanent. The plant that looks modest in year 1 will look like a significant landscape investment in year 5, and like a permanent landscape feature in year 10. Plant 4. Agastache, Agastache funiculum, and the Volatile Oil Water Strategy Agastache. Hyssop or hummingbird mint, depending on the species and regional common name, represents a category of water management strategy distinct from the deep root approach of the previous plants. Where Russian sage, echinacea, and baptisia solve the drought problem by going deep, Agastache solves it at the surface through a biochemical approach to water conservation that is concentrated in its volatile essential oil profile and its specific leaf architecture. Understanding the difference between these two drought strategies is what allows an experienced gardener to build a planting that is drought-capable across all its layers. Deep-rooted species handling the long-term reservoir function, while surface-adapted species like Agastache handle the short-term evaporative. Challenge: the essential oils concentrated in Agastache, foliage, primarily pelargonium, limonene, and various methoxybenzene derivatives depending on the species, are produced in glandular trichomes covering the entire leaf surface. These trichomes do not merely add fragrance. They create a chemical microclimate around each leaf surface that reduces the vapor pressure gradient between the leaf interior and the surrounding air, the gradient that drives water loss through transpiration. The oil layer acts as a vapor barrier, not sealing the leaf completely, but measurably reducing the rate of water loss per unit of leaf area compared to non-aromatic leaves of equivalent size. In a plant covering 3 to 4 square feet of canopy, this reduction compounds across the entire surface area of all leaves and stems into a significant daily water saving that allows the plant to maintain turgor pressure and active photosynthesis. Through heat events that visibly stress non-aromatic neighbors, Agastache also develops a fibrous root system that is broadly distributed through the upper 18 inches of soil, rather than driving deep like echinacea or baptisia. This makes it more dependent on rainfall recharge than the deep-rooted species, but also makes it more effective at capturing that recharge when it arrives. The broad fibrous network intercepts rainfall infiltration across a wide soil volume and stores it in direct proximity to the root system. In the alternating wet-dry cycles that characterize summer weather patterns in most of the continental United States, this strategy is highly effective. Agastache funiculum is hardy in USDA zones 4 through 9, and the Mexican hyssop varieties, Agastache mexicana and its hybrids, extend the heat tolerance into zones 9 and 10. Plant in full sun in any well-drained soil. It self-seeds reliably in zones 6 through 9, creating a self-perpetuating colony that expands the drought-capable coverage of the garden at zero cost after the initial planting. Plant 5, sedum, Hylotelephium spectabile, and the cellular water vault. This is the plant referenced at the beginning of this video. Sedum, specifically the upright border variety, is now classified as Hylotelephium spectabile and its cultivars, including Autumn Joy, Matrona, and Brilliant, stores water in succulent leaf tissue through a cellular water retention system that is biochemically distinct from every other drought strategy discussed in this video, and that produces the specific performance claim made at the outset. Active growth maintenance through 40 or more consecutive days without rainfall in Zone 7. Conditions: the storage mechanism is vacuolar, specialized water storage vacuoles occupying the majority of the volume inside sedum leaf cells. These vacuoles are not merely enlarged versions of the normal cellular water content found in all plant cells. They are specialized structures with membranes containing aquaporin proteins, water channel proteins that regulate the rate of water movement into and out of the vacuole in response to cellular water potential signals. When the plant is well hydrated, these vacuoles fill to capacity and the leaf tissue achieves the distinctive succulent firmness associated with healthy sedum. As drought progresses and the soil moisture available to roots declines, the aquaporin channels regulate the release of vacuolar water into the rest of the cell, maintaining turgor pressure, photosynthetic function, and active growth for the duration of the stored reserve. In a fully hydrated mature sedum clump, the water stored in leaf vacuoles represents enough hydraulic reserve to sustain the plant's metabolic functions through multiple weeks of zero rainfall at summer temperatures. No other non-succulent perennial in the garden achieves this storage density. The economic and practical implications of sedum's water storage capability are direct and significant. In USDA zones 3 through 9, a mature sedum planting requires supplemental irrigation approximately 0 times per season after establishment in climates receiving 12 or more inches of annual rainfall distributed through the growing season. In climates receiving less than 12 annual inches, the Mountain West, the High Plains, the Intermountain Southwest, supplemental irrigation may be needed 2 to 4 times per season to maintain the appearance and performance standard that most gardeners expect. That is 2 to 4 waterings per season compared to the daily or every other day irrigation that annual bedding plants require throughout their entire season. The compounded savings across a 10-season garden career in water cost and time are substantial. Plant sedum in full sun and well-drained soil. The one non-negotiable requirement is drainage. The same. Vacuolar water storage that makes sedum drought capable, makes it susceptible to root rot when the root zone is saturated because the tissue cannot regulate against excessive water absorption the way it regulates against water deficit. Halfway through this list, if reducing the physical and financial demands that a garden places on you, specifically, if the idea that a garden should require less of you every year rather than the same relentless amount, is what brought you here. This channel produces that information every 2 days for the demographic that actually needs it. Gardeners in their 50s and 60s who have invested enough time and money in this to know that the advice being handed out at the garden center is not calibrated to their needs or their stage of life. Drop a U.S. state and USDA zone in the comments right now, because the gardener in the same zone dealing with the same summer heat or the same water restrictions is reading those comments, and the conversation in the comment section of this video is worth more than anything available at the garden center. Plant 6, catmint, Nepeta, X. Fasanii, and the silverleaf. Drought architecture catmint appears on this list for a specific biological reason that has nothing to do with its well-documented nepetalactone content and its effect on cats or pest insects, both of which are real and both of which make catmint a dual-function asset in any garden. The drought capability that earns it a position here is rooted in the same silverleaf architecture as Russian sage, operating through the same trichome-based radiation, reflection, and vapor pressure modification, but combined with a root system strategy that is distinct from any other plant already discussed. Nepeta X. Fasanii and its cultivars develop a shallow but extremely dense, fibrous root system in the top 6 to 10 inches of soil, combined with a woody crown that functions as a carbohydrate and water storage organ. The crown, the woody basal tissue from which all above-ground growth emerges, accumulates starch, reserves and maintains a degree of tissue hydration that buffers the plant against the rapid wilting response that shallower-rooted plants without this crown storage exhibit during heat events. The combination of radiation-reflecting foliage, reducing transpiration demand, dense shallow roots maximizing rainfall capture in the upper soil layer, and crown tissue, providing a short-term hydration buffer, makes catmint capable of maintaining appearance and bloom production through heat events that force neighboring plants into visible stress within 48 hours. The practical garden implication is this: catmint planted at the front edge of a sunny perennial border in zones 3 through 8 requires supplemental irrigation only during extended drought, defined as more than 3 weeks without measurable rainfall in zones 4 through 6 or more than 2 weeks in zones 7 and 8, where evapotranspiration rates are higher. Outside of those drought thresholds, rainfall alone maintains the plant in active growth and repeat bloom production. The Walker's Low cultivar, the most commonly available and most reliably performing catmint at American retail, reaches 18 to 24 inches in height with a spread of 24 to 36 inches in mature specimens and produces 2 to 3 bloom periods per season. If cut back by 1/3 after each flush, that cutback is the only maintenance input the plant requires. A border planted with catmint at the front edge is a border that takes care of its own water supply and its own bloom management through the entire season, with one intervention per flush period. Plant 7, Rudbeckia fulgida, and the Prairie Root Network Black-Eyed Susan, is one of the most commonly planted American perennials and one of the most consistently underestimated in terms of its drought capability, because most gardeners experience it as a cutting garden annual, buying transplants in spring, enjoying the summer bloom, and replacing the plant the following year when it fails to return. That failure is not the plant's failure. It is a root system failure caused by transplanting a plant that was never given the undisturbed soil time to build the prairie root network. That is, its actual functional. Hacetar Rudbeckia fulgida evolved in the tallgrass and mixedgrass prairies of the eastern and central United States, where summer droughts of 3 to 6 weeks without rainfall are a normal annual event and were the competitive root environment of established prairie. Grasses means that any plant unable to access deep, stable moisture will be eliminated from the plant community within a season. Rudbeckia survived this selection pressure by developing a fibrous root system that spreads both laterally and vertically through undisturbed soil, reaching depths of 18 to 30 inches in established plants and covering a lateral radius of 12 to 18 inches. This root network functions as an interceptor grid for rainfall infiltration, capturing and holding moisture across a large soil volume immediately after rainfall events and drawing on that stored moisture through the subsequent dry period. It is not a deep-root drought strategy like Baptisia. It is a volume strategy, maximum soil coverage, at the depths where stable moisture persists through normal summer dry periods, the rhizome system through which Rudbeckia spreads, producing new shoots at regular intervals from horizontal underground stems, serves a secondary water management function beyond reproduction. The rhizomes themselves store carbohydrates and maintain tissue hydration that buffers the above-ground plant through acute heat events. In USDA zones 3 through 9, a Rudbeckia planting in its second season and beyond requires no supplemental watering in climates receiving 15 or more inches of annual rainfall distributed through the growing season. In drier climates, one deep watering per month during peak summer heat maintains the plant without the daily or twice-weekly irrigation that most annual alternatives require. Plant in full sun to part shade in any average garden soil. Do not divide in the first 2 seasons. The root network that produces drought capability is still developing, and division resets that development. By year 3, division is both possible and recommended to expand the planting at 0 cost. Plant 8, Caryopteris X, Clandinensis, and the late-season Reservoir Caryopteris, blue mist shrub, occupies a unique position in the drought-capable plant palette because it delivers its primary ornamental performance, intense blue-purple bloom, in August and September. the period when most drought-capable perennials have finished flowering and when water restriction policies are typically at their most stringent. The ability to produce abundant late-season bloom without irrigation during the most water-restricted period of the American gardening calendar is a functional asset that goes beyond the aesthetic value of the flowers themselves. The drought mechanism in Caryopteris is a combination of the root depth characteristic of woody shrub root systems, significantly deeper than perennial root systems of equivalent, above-ground size, and a leaf surface volatile chemistry that reduces transpiration demand through the same essential oil boundary layer mechanism as agastache and Russian sage. The volatile compounds concentrated in Caryopteris foliage, primarily camphor and various monoterpene derivatives, produce the gray-green aromatic foliage that gives the plant its secondary, common name. In the root system, a mature Caryopteris plant in its third season has driven root depth to 36 to 48 inches in average garden soil, reaching a moisture zone that is stable through all but the most severe multi-month drought events. The combination of reduced transpiration, demand, and deep root access produces a plant that blooms productively in August in Zone 7 without supplemental irrigation, even when July rainfall has been below average. Caryopteris is hardy in USDA zones 5 through 9. In zones 5 and 6, it dies back to the ground in winter and returns from the root crown in spring, treating it functionally as a perennial rather than the deciduous shrub it is in warmer zones. This dieback is not a failure. It is the mechanism that concentrates the plant's resources into the root system during winter, building the root depth and root mass that produces the drought capability in summer. Cut back to 6 inches in early spring as new growth begins. In zones 7 through 9, the woody framework overwinters intact. Prune back hard in early spring to 12 to 18 inches to produce the vigorous new growth on which flowers are produced. Plant in full sun in any well-drained soil. Space at 24 to 36 inches. After establishment, the plant requires no supplemental water in zones 6 through 8 during normal summer conditions, and 1 deep monthly watering in zones 8 and 9 during peak drought months. Plant 9. The nuclear option: prairie dropseed, Spirobolus heterolepis, and the self-managing watershed prairie. Dropseed is the plant that landscape architects and ecological designers reach for when they need a ground-level solution that requires absolutely nothing from the people responsible for maintaining it. And it is almost entirely unknown in the American retail garden market because its commercial appeal, but slow to establish, modest in first-year appearance, not a dramatic bloomer, does not translate to impulse purchase behavior at garden centers. What translates for gardeners who understand the long game is a plant that after a 3-year establishment period produces one of the most water-independent and structurally self-maintaining plant communities available in American horticulture. Spirobolus heterolepis evolved on the dry prairies of the central United States, the same ecological origin as many of the plants already discussed, but it represents a different functional category than any of them. Prairie dropseed is not a flowering perennial with ornamental value and a secondary drought capability. It is a grass, a C4 photosynthetic grass, which means it uses a photosynthetic biochemistry specifically adapted to operate at maximum efficiency under the high temperature and high light intensity conditions that shut down the C3 photosynthetic pathway that most ornamental plants use. At soil temperatures above 85 degrees Fahrenheit, conditions that cause measurable photosynthetic stress in the majority of garden plants, prairie dropseed is at peak metabolic efficiency. Its photosynthetic rate increases with temperature within the range it encounters in American summers. It is not tolerating summer heat. It is thriving in it. The root system of mature prairie dropseed has been measured in prairie restoration research at depths exceeding 6 feet in undisturbed prairie soil, deeper than any other plant on this list, and deep enough to access the permanent water table in many American soil profiles. This root depth is reached gradually. Prairie dropseed prioritizes root development over above-ground growth in its first 2 seasons, which is why it looks modest while it is doing the most important work of its establishment. By year 3, the above-ground appearance transforms into the distinctive, fine-textured, arching fountain of foliage that design professionals specify for its visual quality. By year 4, the root system has reached its functional depth, and the plant enters the permanent drought-independent phase that it will maintain for decades without any input from the gardener. In USDA zones 3 through 8, prairie dropseed, once established, requires no supplemental irrigation whatsoever. It manages its own water supply from rain and from the deep, stable moisture it reaches through a root architecture that took 3 years and significant carbon investment to build. The gardener who plants it this spring and tends it for 3 seasons is making a watershed infrastructure investment that will pay returns for the lifetime of the landscape. 9 plants, 9 documented water management, systems built by millions of years of evolutionary selection, pressure in the drought conditions that commercial horticulture has been pretending to solve with hoses and irrigation timers. The hose is not the solution. It is the problem, the tool that enabled the wrong plants to be sold to the wrong gardens for the wrong reasons. Every plant on this list is available at most American garden centers. Most of them are in the perennial section with no label that communicates what they are capable of. The label says drought tolerant. It does not say self-managing underground reservoir. It does not say 40 days without water. It does not say permanent hydraulic infrastructure. Those descriptions are accurate. They are simply not commercially useful to the people selling the plants. Every 2 days, new content on this channel about the plants that work harder than the gardener maintaining them. If this is not in the subscription feed, it is not arriving consistently. Subscribe now and drop 1 comment before closing this video. U.S. State and USDA zone. The gardener in the same zone reading that comment is the most useful resource available for the specific plant decisions that determine whether this garden works or whether it keeps requiring what it has always required.